regardless of what we do to our emissions, even if we reduce them all to zero tomorrow. So all of these worlds are attached to a whole bunch of data. We tried to take the global data that existed, IPCC scenarios and others, and drill them down as local a level as we possibly could. We also gathered local data to support that, models of demographics and socioeconomic changes that would happen for Metro Vancouver into the future. So we attached each of these scenarios to the population, obviously greenhouse gases, which drive the impacts in each of these worlds, energy use, economy, and land use. So this is just to sort of show you that they all have something behind them other than a colored planet. So our first case was Delta. We also did the District of North Vancouver, and as you see from this map, most of Delta is between 0 and 2 meters above sea level right now, and so it's protected by a dike. So we created this 3D image of a part of West Delta and West Tongue Island at the top there. And the first thing we want to show is just, of course, what it looks like now in a high tide circumstance, as well as the storm surge and flood. So you'll see that the substandard dikes up in West Tongue Island in the top right-hand corner there have been breached, and there's flooding in West Tongue Island, which happens now. If we zoom into a dike view, so this is a LiDAR image. This is a 3D model of Roberts Bank. All those lumps you see are actually trees. They're just the finest resolution we could get with the model we have. And you'll see the dike going through the center there. So if we skip forward to 2100 with the sea level rise that we'd expect to see in a high emissions scenario based on rather conservative estimates, if you have a high tide with a storm surge, there would be pretty frequent overtopping of this dike. But if there was a breach and a sustained storm surge, you could see that equilibration on either side of the dike and sustained flooding. If we zoom into a neighborhood, we created these images of Beach Grove, a neighborhood in Delta, to show what people living there would actually experience. So this is what it looks like more or less today. And this is what it looks like today when it floods, which it does do and has done. In 2006, we had floods that the spray reached up to the second story of homes there. So this is not an uncommon circumstance already, which leads you perhaps to believe that much of Delta is built on kind of rural areas. In a World 1 scenario, we go into 2020, and we see in a storm surge, high tide condition, again, this equilibration on either side of the dike. If we go into 2050, we start seeing the vegetation change. The species of trees that are currently there are not adaptable to these flood conditions, and so patterns of vegetation start changing. In 2100, some of those trees are gone, and in my opinion, this is quite, again, conservative. A couple of houses start disappearing, but it's not uncommon in areas like this that are so vulnerable to these extreme events that insurance starts to be denied to homes. So that's happened elsewhere in the world, and this could likely happen in Delta, certainly by 2100. So many more of these houses might be gone by then. So what do? Let's move into a World 2 adapt to the risk kind of scenario. We could raise the dike, obviously, protect ourselves from this water, from these storms. But we've seen in Delta that occasionally there's some objection to that, and who would have thought, that people would object to being protected? But this is why. A lot of people feel that it would impede their view and diminish the value of their property, so they're willing to take the risk in exchange for the view. Not to simplify the matter. The community is very important, so this is one option of how we can respond. But we need to explore multiple adaptation options. This is a berm. There's lots of examples of creative ways to protect from rising sea levels all across Europe, of course, the Netherlands, the UK, etc. So this is, this provides a new green space that wasn't there before, perhaps more appealing to residents than standard dike. In a World 3 scenario, we start to try to gather that low-hanging fruit. Solar panels on our homes. You'll see that homes are also raised on stilts. So we're reducing some of our emissions as well as protecting these homes from the extreme events. very small cars there now. And in World 4, this is one image that we have of this Beach Grove neighborhood in a World 4. So this is a deep sustainability scenario where the dike has been raised. We have innovative adaptive technologies for these homes like floating platforms, much better served by mass transit and energy independent, carbon neutral, all of those good things. So this just sort of summarizes these 4 different scenarios for Beach Grove and Delta, and we found that it's quite easy to internalize your choices here, but really important in walking people through these worlds is that what we want to do is consider adaptation and mitigation simultaneously. We want to find those win-win scenarios where we can make our communities more resilient and adaptable to impacts while also making them low carbon and also higher quality of life, better communities to live in, better human health, better all of these indicators by which we judge quality of life. We want to try to find those solutions that do them all, so that even if some of our estimates are off regarding the impacts of climate change, it doesn't matter because you'd want to live here anyway. So that's sort of the goal, is to find those integrated solutions. Of course, these scenarios have implications for land use. This I'll just run through quickly, an overview here, a fly-review of Tawasin. This is as it currently stands in a World 1 scenario. 2020, we just see a little blip of development, which is actually already proposed on top of the agricultural land reserve. In 2050, we start to see these houses, if the ALR isn't preserved, expanding out onto that valuable food production land. That's not necessarily the case. It's not current planning philosophy at all. But what we need to consider here, especially in 2100, is that we have these environmental refugees. So we have increasing population pressure from around the world that we might not be able to handle, that we can't plan for necessarily as well as we had hoped, especially given interesting economic times. And so you start to see in the far, far right corner that faint brown area can be unplanned development, as you see in many cities in the developing world. And obviously you're sacrificing your agricultural land there. But let's scale it back. Let's look at World 2. You don't see much change here. You'll just see a tiny little buffer along the coastline there. Houses are moved back to protect them from wave action and storm surge. But in a World 3, we start densifying the core and moving off of the agricultural land reserve. And in my view, this also, this is an adaptation strategy as well as a mitigation strategy. You preserving that source of food in your agricultural land reserve makes your community and your region more resilient to fluctuations in world markets and that kind of thing. So we're seeing densification of the core, and in World 4 even more so, with potential biofuel production in the ALR there. Very contentious issue, fuel, etc. So I'm just going to skim through, I don't want to present only Delta here because Metro Vancouver is so varied, so many different impacts across this region. And the impacts that we see in an area like the North Shore, obviously very different from a low-lying area like Delta. Sea level rise, not so much a problem. Slope stability, forest health, stream health, sound, all of those kinds of things become issues in the North Shore Mountains. So this is a 3D image that we created of the district of North Vancouver, one little slice of one mountain. Grass Mountain at the top and Mosquito Creek running through on the right there. So in a World 1 scenario, we see expansion of single-family homes up the slopes a little bit further. We do expect increasing variability of precipitation patterns. So we could see streams scouring in the winter, but drying out a little bit more in the summer. And windstorms, which we've obviously already seen. Not to link that one windstorm to climate change. However, that kind of thing is what we might expect to see in the future under a scenario of climate change. Skipping forward to 2050, arborists and others in the District of North Vancouver have told us that with that increasing frequency of windstorms and all the blowdown, that produces fuel for forest fires in the area, and the risk of interface forest fire becomes much more enhanced. For instance, we saw a massive fire in 2004 in Kelowna. Clearly, Kelowna is a different climate entirely than the North Shore, but we might expect to see our climate transitioning in that direction into the distant future, not so distant, 2050. And finally, in 2100, the character of the forest changes fundamentally, and this is really dear to the hearts of people that live in the North Shore Mountains. The character of their forest, their green space, it's a heavily used recreational area, and it's really part of the character of the community there. So we see a shift towards broadleaf regrowth in place of what was damaged in fire and windstorms. We see these homes moving into very unstable areas. Slope stability, landslides are a major issue in these areas because of and we've already seen such a thing. Very unfortunate loss of life, actually. But if we just skip forward to, world forest scenario in 2100, that's not to say that none of these impacts of climate change will happen, but we certainly haven't been moving people into vulnerable areas, and that's a really critical difference between World I and World IV. So zooming into a neighborhood, this is a very typical, fantastically beautiful North Shore neighborhood, broad streets, big homes. But we could transform this into a sustainable neighborhood that has, a local food supply, greater possibilities for alternative transportation methods, multi-family homes, community gardening, all of these things that make it both resilient and fundamentally low carbon. And if the kids golf cart. So when we took this to the community, we had held a few sessions in Delta as well as in the North Shore. We asked people before and after seeing these images how they felt about them. And interestingly, in Delta, this is a pretty severe discrepancy here, but 86% of respondents think the Delta currently is in a World I or World II scenario. So there is some adaptation going on, but not much mitigation, certainly, yet. Much is planned. And 75% of them think the Delta should be in World IV. So we see this, pretty grand difference between where people think they are now and where they'd like to be. And when we had a group like yourselves see these images, we asked them, when do you think impacts are going to become serious in your local community? Beforehand, they said, some of them said, yes, it's serious now. Some people said 20 years from now. And you can see that shift to the right. So after seeing these images, generally people felt that, this is something that even if the impacts aren't serious now, the responses have to occur now in order to prepare us for what's to come. So in summary, this process is, the images that we use, localizing these phenomena, has been a really powerful way of bringing climate change home, increasing concern and awareness and pretty sophisticated understandings of our mitigation and adaptation options, what sustainability means in these communities, and gathering really rich information from so many great people, many of whom are here today, to help us understand what's going on in Delta and elsewhere. Generally, the process, because it was rooted in science, because it was presented that way, was perceived to be quite credible. And really importantly, even a non-visualization process, so not using these 3D images, was still really powerful for people. Walking through what could happen and just using maps and traditional photos instead of 3D images is still a really important process. And for some grand statements, climate change is real. It's already here. There wasn't an area of land use planning or city planning or sustainability that we could find that wasn't affected by climate change. We need to be incredibly creative about how we design our responses, and integrated responses that are win-wins are the best ones by a long shot. And that's it. I'd like to thank Stephen Shepard, obviously, who's the director of Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning, Stuart Cohen, who's in the audience today, the Lily Coaster Delta, and all of our funders, including Geoid, which is